Here you'll see different ways to prototype an Angular application and how to deploy it. That is to say, the commissioning for it to function on the client's facilities. The stage where you start building the app and adjust its operation in accordance with the requirements to be fulfilled is called prototyping. Since an Angular app has a front end and a back end, now you'll see the prototyping options available for each part. Start by prototyping the back end. So far, we've been using the default mechanisms for prototyping. Since we use GeneXus Trial, both the back-end and front-end parts are automatically prototyped in the GeneXus Cloud, and we can't change the value of the deploy to cloud property. With the full version, you could select the value of that property and then prototype in the cloud with value yes, or also set the deploy property to cloud as no, and prototype on a web server installed in our local computer, with the DBMS installed locally as well, in which case the access to data in the database would take place only on your computer. As we said, the front end is instantiated in the deploy to cloud cloud. In this case, the application will run on AWS S3, Amazon Simple Storage Service, which is a service offered by Amazon Web Services that provides object storage through a web service interface and is accessed through the Amazon CloudFront Content Delivery Network, CDN. This is a web service that streamlines the distribution of static and dynamic web content to users, such as HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and image files. But you have other choices for prototyping. If you go to the properties of the Angular generator, in the properties of the environment front end, you'll see that the run target property is available. If you press the combo, you'll see several values possible. Default. Angular Development Server is the Angular HTTP server of the Angular platform running locally on the development machine. This is a simple server designed for SPA, Single Page App, developers. Local Web Server. The app is transpiled, which means translation from a source language into another source language, in this case from TypeScript into JavaScript, and then copied to the local web server of the GeneXus environment. For example, Tomcat in Java or Internet Information Server in .NET. The application is executed directly under the web backend URL. Once you conclude development of the app on your computer, you must deploy it for operation on the client's facilities, either with an internal client in your own organization or with an external client. In this example, that would take place in the travel agency's servers. Deploying an app in Angular implies 3 stages. The distribution of the front-end objects to be deployed on the HTTP server, the distribution of the REST services to be deployed on the app server, and the distribution of the database structures. Start with the front end. The deployment of front-end objects when using the trial version, or the full version with the deploy to cloud property set to yes, is performed automatically by GeneXus, which generates everything necessary and takes it to the GeneXus Cloud, with no need for the developer to make any configurations. To deploy the application when using the full version, this procedure can be done through the Angular command line interface, or through the build mode property. To do it by command line, we open a command window, select the KB folder of the main object, in this case, view home, and type the command ng build -- configuration production. This process creates, below the folder of the main object, a dist folder that has everything necessary for the front end. Instead of writing a command line, you can do this directly from the GeneXus IDE. If you go to the properties of the Angular generator, you'll see there the build mode property that allows the developer to set the mode in which the Angular app is to be executed. The default value is prototype, where the minimum dependencies required are imported into your project for executing the Angular app. In the case of the development mode, packages used in testing and debugging are also imported to aid in the development of the app. And the distribution mode is used if you want to generate the packages for deploying the app. Selecting this mode implies the automatic execution of the command ng build configuration production that you saw before. Following the distribution process and the generation of the dist file, the full file is copied to the client's HTTP server. For example, Internet Information Services or Apache Tomcat. Before going on, let's make it clear that both REST services and database reorganizations can only be performed using the full version of GeneXus. Now let's see how we deploy the REST services through the main object. Deployment of the REST services is done by creating a deployment unit object that you'll call, for example, services, and then dragging the main object over the services node. In the KB Explorer, you'll see that the deployment unit you created is shown under the environment deployment node. To deploy, right-click on the deployment unit and select Deploy Application. Another option is using the application deployment tool that's accessed from the build menu and selecting Deploy Application. You'll see that the option Deployment Unit Services that already contains your main object is automatically selected. Then, with the target combo box, select the type of deployment that you'll do, local to a Docker image, or to an external server such as Microsoft Windows Azure or AWS Elastic Beanstalk. And then press the Deploy button. The database is distributed by exporting the reorg to the production database server. During the build process, GeneXus creates, and by default also executes, the reorganization programs. To export the reorg, you may go to Build, Export Reorganization to create a package, a zip file for .NET, like the one in the example, and .jar for Java, with the files required to execute the reorg programs that have been created in the last compilation process. The package may be sent to the production database server to decompress and execute it there, to create or reorganize the structures of the corresponding database. If you search the wiki, you can find additional data on how to export reorganizations in the article entitled Export Reorganization. This video showed you how to deploy an app generated in Angular in its three components: front end, REST services, and database reorganizations. Deployment is part of the development process, particularly in a DevOps development cycle, where it's possible to automate this process along with other processes that allow the app's new version to function in production in a brief period and in an agile and continuous manner.